So since the lockdown started, which is now, nearly 4 months away, I have cycled 2,250 miles, most of it in Cambridgeshire. I feel a little bit like Captain Tom, you know, the guy who was going round and round the garden on his Zimmer frame. Well, I've been going round and round Cambridgeshire. I do about 20 miles a day, and I've done, you know, a lot of rides. So it's racked up to over 2,000 miles. It's my new little interest. Despite suffering from rheumatoid arthritis and being quite an old person, I'm actually really got seriously into, serious cycling. And so much so that next summer I intend to cycle from Land's End to John O'Groats for charity. That's over 1,000 miles, the whole length of Britain. And I'm going to raise some money for a Buddhist centre in Calcutta, India, that I'm involved with. And also I'm going to give some money to Arthritis Action as well, which is a really great charity. So it's my new interest. I've got interested in cycling in a new way, and it's going really well. One of the things that happens with me when I get a new interest, I don't know about you, but I tend to, if I'm interested in something new, I tend to buy books on it. It just happens. Yes, I look at websites, I might join groups, but more than anything, I buy books. And I've got quite a few books on cycling already. Of course, it's the same with Buddhism and meditation. People come along to Buddhism and meditation, they get really interested in it. And what do? You buy books on the subject. In fact, if you visit any Buddhist house, you'll usually find they've got scores and scores of books. And experienced Buddhists like Arthur Siddhi and me, people have often got hundreds of books, most of which we don't read. It's just what we do. We buy books on things that we're interested in. Bhante Sangha, the founder of our order, the Triratna movement, said that if you want to go deeper into the Dhamma, you only really need 3 or 4 books, actually. Just take those 3 or 4 books and really go deeply into those books, and that's all you'll need. And one of those books is probably the Dhammapada, that book, and the subject of this series that we've got going at the moment. It's a really wonderful book, actually, on the Dhamma, because it's absolutely packed. It's really packed with really essential Dharma teachings. You don't really need much else. And one of the key teachings that you can find in the Dhammapada is called the 3 characteristics of conditioned existence, or sometimes known as the Laksanas. So you can find that in chapter 20 of the Dhammapada, verses 5, 6, and 7. So I'm going to read them to you now. Here we go. All conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with insight, one becomes weary of suffering. This is the way to purity. All conditioned things are painful. When one sees this with insight, one becomes weary of suffering. This is the way of purity. All things whatsoever are devoid of unchanging selfhood. When one sees this with insight, one becomes weary of suffering. This is the way of purity. So these are the 3 very famous verses in the Dhammapada, outlining a really essential teaching, which is essential to all schools of Buddhism. So these verses introduce the 3 characteristics of conditioned existence, or Laksanas. Firstly, impermanence, anicca. Secondly, unsatisfactoriness, or dukkha. And thirdly, insubstantiality, or anatta. Sometimes these Laksanas are called marks or stains. In fact, that's the literal translation of Lakshana. So it's as if life itself is just stained with these particular characteristics. It's a little bit like getting a white cloth and dipping it into a vat of dye. And well, once the dye is in the cloth, it won't come out in the wash. And it's like the Lakshanas won't come out in the wash of life. They're just there and they're going to stay there. You might have noticed me repeating the phrase, when one sees this with insight, one becomes weary of suffering. Well, it's quite an important phrase in the Dhammapada. It tells us that the Lakshanas are really, really important focus for reflection. Reflection on the Lakshanas is an excellent way to gain insight. Yeah, reaching that point on the spiritual path where there's no going back. You've seen too much. It's irreversible. You've woken up and you've really seen the truth of the Dharma so deeply that you can't unsee it. So let's have a look. Let's have a look at these Lakshanas. I'll say a little bit about them. So first of all conditioned things are impermanent or anicca. So what this is saying is that everywhere we look, inside ourselves, outside ourselves, everything is arising and everything is passing away. Yeah, it's all changing into something else. Impermanence is the essence of everything. The seasons change from summer to autumn, from autumn to winter, to spring, and then back to summer. Babies become children. Children become teenagers. Teenagers turn into adults. Adults into old people. And then they pass away. Impermanence is there in the meeting and parting of friends. Impermanence is there in the falling in love with someone and then falling out of love. It's there when you buy your new shirt, and then it's there when you eventually recycle it into a cleaning rag. Impermanence is bittersweet, but it is the truth. Absolutely everything is impermanent. Every conditioned thing, nothing lasts at all. From galaxies to gas boilers, from planets to pajamas, everything is impermanent. And of course, that includes us. And flowers, when they come into bloom in the garden, almost immediately they're fading away. I had a little look at some statistics from the biggest things to the smallest things. And the average age of a galaxy, by the way, which is the biggest thing that we can ever imagine, is 12 billion years. It's a very long time, but eventually it passes. The average age of a planet is 4.5 billion. The average age of a cathedral is 700 years. The average age of a person, the lifespan of a person on this planet, taken as a whole, as an average, is only 72 years. The average lifespan of a laptop computer is 3 years. The average lifespan of a t-shirt is 2.7 years. The average lifespan of a banana is 60 days. Of a snowdrop, it's 40 days. Of a snowflake, it's 17 minutes. And the average British breakfast is consumed in 12.2 minutes. I could go on and on, couldn't I? Often we've got no real respect for impermanence. We don't take any delight in it. We often regard it as quite painful. We resist it. We don't want to know. We kind of paper over the cracks so that we don't see it. We forget that we're part of the natural flow of life. But impermanence is a principle of harmony. If you're in harmony with the principle of impermanence, you're in harmony with reality. When we don't struggle against it, life is better for us. So we need to acknowledge impermanence and respect it, even celebrate impermanence, you could say. Our lives will be happier if we do. So impermanence is a manifestation of the central Buddhist teaching of Dhammapada, or conditionality. So I thought I'd give you a little story at this point. And imagine, if you can, a very hot summer's day in 1965 in Weston-super-Mare by the seaside. So there I am, I'm aged 6 years old on a hot day by the seaside, and I'm building a large and elaborate sandcastle. So I'm building all the turrets, I'm working away happily for hours, a little kid, building all the turrets. I've got little curtain walls, I'm pouring water in there with my little bucket and spade. I've got all the little windows on the castle made out of little seashells. And my parents are happily sitting away somewhere close by. And then my older brother comes over and decides he wants to kick my sandcastle down. I resist this, and a scuffle breaks out between the two of us, and we're rolling around on the sand, scuffling away as I try and protect my sandcastle. My parents intervene and separate us, and I turn around and say, he's trying to knock down my sandcastle. So my brother is rebuked by my parents. However, my parents then point out that in actual fact, we're going to have to leave the beach quite quickly because the tide is coming in. It's coming in fast. So we leave the beach, and 20 minutes later, I watch as my sandcastle is completely consumed by the sea. So this true little story, I think, is a bit of a metaphor for how we can resist the inevitable fact of impermanence. Here we are scuffling away on the beach, trying to maintain these important sandcastles in our lives, when in actual fact, there's a much bigger thing approaching us, which is we can't avoid. So the second Lakshana, all conditioned things are painful. Dukkha. So this is the teaching of unsatisfactoriness, dukkha. And the second Lakshana is in fact linked to the first, to impermanence. There's quite a lot of misconceptions around dukkha. Sometimes people think, oh, when they first come to Buddhism, they think Buddhism's very dour, it's very pessimistic, it's all about suffering and spiritualizing suffering and all this kind of stuff. It can be very off-putting for newcomers. I'm not surprised when I hear this. But of course, it isn't really about that. Because conditioned existence is unsatisfactory, it doesn't mean that ordinary life can't be enjoyable, because ordinary life is enjoyable. There's a huge amount of pleasure going on in life. What the teaching is really saying is that the material world and life itself, as it's normally lived, can never offer us complete and permanent satisfaction. I'll just sort of repeat that for you. The material world and life as it is normally lived can never offer us complete and permanent satisfaction. Yeah, even on the most perfect day, where the sun is shining and everything is going really well in every way, there'll be some little annoying thing that comes along and intervenes and prevents us from having a perfect day. There's always dukkha in life, there's always something. And quite often, there's quite a lot of it. In fact, the Buddha told us that there was 3 kinds of dukkha, 3 kinds of unsatisfactoriness. And the first one is called the suffering of suffering. This is really the fact that there is actual suffering, there's actual pain in life. Yeah, we get ill, we can be injured or physically hurt. There is pain, there is actual pain in life, and we have to learn to accept this physical pain. It's just one of those facts of life. And little children, when they're growing up, they have to get used to this. They have to get used to the fact that there's physical pain. I've got a little granddaughter, and One minute she's playing on her bike and laughing away and waving away and smiling. The next thing she's fallen off her bike and she's crying and yelling, and it just happened just like that. She's having to get used to the pain that there is in life. The second kind is called the suffering of change. And of course, it's impermanence again. Life is change. It's going on all the time. And we get very attached to things. We get attached to things staying the same. We want things to stay the same. And we don't like it when things don't stay the same. But of course, that's inevitable. There's quite a lot of anxiety around this when things don't stay the same. But somehow, if we can, we need to be able to factor this into life, that things are not going to stay the same. I had an experience of this in India last year. I was visiting a large Buddhist center in Pune. Pune is a big city in India, the size of London. It's got 5 Buddhist centers there, Triratna Buddhist centers. And the largest one's called the Mahavihar. It's a really beautiful place in the center of Pune. But the last time I had seen it was 16 years previously. I'd given a talk there. And at that time, the center was in the middle of this area of open ground on the outskirts of the city, with a large river meandering past it, and not many people and houses around or anything. That was the last time I saw it. And then I went there to lead a retreat last year, and I couldn't recognize it. The whole area around there was covered in tower blocks. All these tower blocks are built up. We're overlooking the Mahavihar. There was traffic, noise. There was thousands of people everywhere. It completely changed. And I didn't see that coming at all. I hadn't factored it in. It was quite painful when I first arrived and had to encounter this completely different place. But that's what happens. There's the suffering that comes about from change. And then thirdly, we've got something called existential suffering. And that's the subtle suffering that comes about from being a conditioned person in an imperfect world. Being unenlightened. Knowing there must be more to life than the 9 to 5 and the endless round. And, well, wanting something bigger, better, higher, deeper. And this was the Buddha's experience, of course, before he was the Buddha, when he was Prince Siddhartha, swanning around and amusing himself in the pleasure palaces, but knowing in his heart of hearts that there was something deeper and more meaningful to be sought after, which is what he did. So we need to look at dukkha. We need to look at the different kinds of dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness of life, without getting kind of morbid about it. We don't need to get morbid about dukkha, but we do need to really see it. And if we can really see it, it can be incredibly liberating to be able to see and talk about it with other people in a constructive way. As human beings, we've got a tendency to avoid the painful stuff in life. Yeah, we paper over the cracks. We'd rather not look at it. But the Buddha is saying that we do need to. We need to thoroughly do that. And if we can, we'll be more ethical. We'll turn away from the needless pain that we cause ourselves and cause other people as well, and we'll enter the path of purity. Facing dukkha can be such a relief. So finally, the third lakshana. All things whatsoever are devoid of unchanging selfhood, or not self. Once again, this lakshana can lead to quite a lot of misunderstandings in Buddhism. When people first come across this teaching, they think it means Buddhism is saying I don't exist. Buddhism is saying that nothing exists. It's a kind of nihilism, which can lead to a kind of zombie state where you don't actually believe you're really real. you know, new Buddhists can get into this kind of state. It's a misunderstanding of the teaching. Anatta is much, much more positive than this. Once again, it is an extension of the teaching of impermanence. And the Buddha said that when we look deeply at any conditioned phenomena, including ourselves, you won't find any essence or any core to anything. That you won't find any core that is fixed and unchanging. So there's no soul, there's no fixed self, there's no essential person or entity. Obviously, it doesn't mean that there's nothing there and that we don't exist, because we very much are here and we very much do exist. But it's a dynamic nexus of conditions, habits, and relationships. And of course, again, it's another manifestation of conditioned co-production. I, Saddharaja, have got a self. You have got yourselves as well. But the self that I've got today is a different self from the 6-year-old boy that was building a sandcastle in Weston-super-Mare. It's even a slightly different self from what I was in 2019 when I visited Pune. It's even a different self from the one that manifested before the lockdown. So it's important to get hold of this teaching, because if we're going to grow and change, spiritual development means change. We need to see this. We need to see this deeply. So there is no fixed self. And also, there is no fixed entity in relation to things as well in the material world. And this can take a little bit more imagination to get hold of. So nothing in its current form is fixed. This is the reality. Chairs can become firewood. Water turns into steam. Flowers in the garden become compost. Bhante Sangharakshita had an excellent take on seeing with not seeing the not self in things. He talked in terms of the wisdom of aesthetic appreciation, which simply means enjoying looking at things as things, rather than trying to see things in relation to use or utility. It's really a mindfulness teaching. When we see things in terms of utility, we tend to think, well, can I eat it? Can I sell it? Can I put it to work? Can I photograph it? This is how we view things when we're seeing them in a fixed kind of way. But actually, things that cannot ultimately be defined, the Buddha tells us. Everything is changing in its nature, and we can learn to enjoy that, appreciate it even. Sometimes artists can help us do that. In 1976, when I was a different self from what I am at the moment, I was a teenager and I visited the Tate Gallery in London. And I wanted to view Carl Andre's 1966 controversial work, Equivalent 8, which was really 120 stone fire bricks neatly stacked together on the polished floor of the Tate Gallery and exhibited as a work of art. Now, I'd like to say that I immediately understood what the artist was trying to communicate about things not being fixed as objects, but just like everybody else, I was baffled and outraged and just didn't understand it. So some forms of art can help us to see the insubstantiality of familiar objects and their non-fixed nature. And that's what some forms of art are trying to do. If you get some time, look up Marcel Duchamp's Fountain. Yeah, have a look and see what you see. So when we learn to see with the wisdom of appreciation, life becomes quite a lot fuller and richer. There's a big release of energy because we're encountering reality. And this is the path of the Bodhisattva. She or he is looking at people and things with metta and with appreciation. So these are the three characteristics of conditioned existence. And they're a deep and essential teaching of the Buddha, and they can be found in the Dhammapada. The truth of the teachings cannot be denied by anyone, at least intellectually. But emotionally, we can deny them. We can really resist these teachings, and we paper over the cracks. But all Buddhist practice helps us to see and come to terms emotionally and spiritually with this teaching. As we do that, increasingly our lives will become more satisfying and we will become more free. We can see with insight. So I've got a question for you to take into your breakout group on the Laksanas. It's quite a simple question, really. Which of the Laksanas do you resist the most, and why? How could you accept the Lakshana more? So that's it, that's my talk. I hope you got something from that. So we're going to move on to the breakout groups now, where you'll have a group leader and you can have a discussion on what I've just been talking about. Thank you.